and unfretted strings, known as open strings. Because of the open strings, open chords have that vibrancy that sounds really warm and lush. The other main type of chord is known as a movable chord or bar chord, although not all movable chords involve a barred finger. Anyway, so we're going to be using these familiar open chord shapes we learn as beginners up and down the neck to create more interesting chord voicings. So let's start with a practical example. First, just make sure you've numbered your fingers 1 to 4. Now, here's the basic A minor open chord. All we're going to do is move our fingers up a couple of frets, keeping that same formation. The A string and high E string will remain open as they are in the A minor position. So let's take a listen. So already we've got quite a nice new chord voicing there. Even though we're using the A minor shape with our fingers, the chord itself is no longer A minor because we've moved out of that position. What the new chord is not really important to know at this stage. Rather, I just want you to use your ears to discover new chords that you like the sound of. You can always go into the chord theory behind it at a later date. So that's the basic idea. We're floating these finger formations up to new positions on the fretboard while still keeping the original open strings as they are. Now we can also do the same with the A major shape and mix it with movements using the minor shape. For example, I could use that familiar A major fingering at the 5th fret to get a very different sound. So that's 2 new chords we've essentially discovered in the past couple of minutes, simply by nudging those familiar open chord forms up the neck. When trying these shapes out at new fret positions, trust your ears as to what works and what doesn't. They won't sound great at every fret. Okay, let's now try applying this method to other open chord shapes we know, to expand our chord library even more. Let's now have a look at the open E major chord, which again you should be familiar with. If not, it's all on fretjam.com. So, using the same technique we did with A minor and major shapes, let's try moving that 3-fingered E shape up the fretboard. If I move it just 1 fret up, here's what we get. A rather Spanish flamenco sounding F major chord. If you wanted to include that low E string bass note, it needs to follow the chord shape wherever you move it. So basically, you fret it in its normal power chord or bar chord position 2 frets below the A string fret, like this. Obviously, I'll need to change my fingering to accommodate this. Now, this shape can be used in quite a few positions. For example, it seems to work on the 1st fret, which is what we've just seen, the 2nd fret, F sharp, the 3rd fret, G, 5th fret, which gives us a very nice modification of the A major chord, 7th fret, B major, 8th fret, C major, 10th fret, D major, and then we're back at E major at the 12th fret, also known as the octave. So that's a lot of new major chords to add to our library. We can use these in our songwriting to replace the more basic open or bar chords. Personally, I love using these floating chord shapes because by including open strings in your chords, you can find voicings that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get with your typical run-of-the-mill bar chords. And how simple was all that? So try using this technique with other open chord shapes you know. Try it with the major, minor, and any other forms that you know. I mean, that's a lot of new chords to discover right there. Let's just look at one final chord shape using the E minor open shape. So if, like before, we move the shape up a couple of frets, we'll potentially have a new chord. However, sometimes you need to use a bit of improvisation and modify the shape slightly to make them sound more compatible with the open strings. In this case, I'm simply going to change my fingering so it's my third and fourth fingers fretting the A and D strings. Then I'm going to position my first finger on the G string 2 frets below my third and fourth. These 3 strings provide us with the basic minor triad. I'm also going to leave out the low E string because it'll just muddy up the chord in most cases, but I'll still leave the top 2 strings open as they are in the original E minor position. That's a nice dreamy F sharp minor variation there, and it's all because we've left the open B and high E strings resonating through the chord. Like before, trust your ears to pick out which positions work for this shape. At some frets it'll sound pretty nasty or incompatible, but at others you'll get some really beautiful voicings, such as at the 5th fret, the 5th fret being where the low E string root note would be if we were including it, say in a minor bar chord. At some positions,